Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. This is our All Things Latin America edition, and while I was supposed to return with our Africa series, our journey across the continent, looking at each country's history and current affairs, several political earthquakes happened across Latin America. The far right of Chile, Bolivia, Honduras, and Peru have won major elections via Western, largely U.S. meddling. And if that wasn't bad enough, the Western war on Venezuela reached new escalating heights, and we've seen international law defaced and Western imperialism, already infinitely evil, reach a hideously new low. The U.S. attacked Venezuela, covertly invaded the country, massacred the security of President Nicolas Maduro and his wife and kidnapped them. They were subjected to beatings and tortures and to public humiliations. All of this violates international law. I want to emphasize that. So, on this rather dark, depressing, demoralizing, dejected, but nonetheless special edition on this day of One Plus One, we'll be covering Venezuela and maybe Latin America. But first, let me introduce our guest. We have Jesus Rodriguez, the editor in chief of Orinoco Tribune, an independent news outlet based in Caracas, covers Latin American and international affairs from a Chavista perspective, and he comes to us from Caracas. And we are also joined by Canadian media critic, NGO critic, anti-imperialist campaigner, critical leftist thinker Joe Emersberger, whose articles you can find at fair.org, which is America's leading left-wing media critic organization, ZNet, Red Sails, and his own Substack, Unedited Anti-Imperialism. And he is the co-author with the equally brilliant historian, journalist, and host and editor of the Anti-Empire Project, Justin Pordor. They both produced a book which I recently got over the holidays. Let me actually plug that one. Extraordinary Threats, the U.S. Empire, the Media, and 20 Years of Coup Attempts in Venezuela. And before I welcome them, a reminder of folks, please share One Plus One widely. Share us across Facebook, Instagram, email, all your social media. Help us overcome the far right algorithms. Help us overcome the monopoly Western corporate media and Western state media has in the social media world by, again, sharing us widely. Donate to One Plus One at our PayPal if you can. And if you would like to donate differently, then get in touch at Youri@gmail, and I'll see what I can do to help. And lastly, Facebook sometimes blocks me from sharing One Plus One. So again, it's very important people like and share us widely. Now on to the task at hand. First off, Jesus and Joe, thank you so much for taking the time to come on today, and welcome back to the program, even though it's under these terrible circumstances.
My pleasure, Youri.
All righty, and my first question. Let's start with Jesus and then Joe, but let's start with Jesus. So Jesus, you are based in Caracas. Wow, where to even begin? As I was saying off the air, my stomach is constantly churning, my blood is constantly boiling at this epic injustice that was inflicted on your country. And between that and the avalanche of junk journalism, junk laws, and trash analysis from corporate media and Western state media, and even outlets that are targeted at leftists or left-leaning people, it's all quite dizzying. So, Jesus, tell us, because again, you're based in Caracas, what happens when the Americans attacked and then kidnapped President Maduro and his wife? What's been the response of vast majorities of Venezuelans? What is the current mood? And what plan of and most importantly, what plan of action can Venezuela, the state of Venezuela, try to do to retrieve President Maduro and his wife, or is international law such an empty paper and a joke that the deck is stacked against Nicolas Maduro and his wife? Jesus, your response, and yeah, I'm very curious your response.
Please remind me if I forgot, because it's a complex question. If I forgot any of the axis of the questions, but going to the beginning, on Saturday the 3rd, the gringos began to bomb Caracas. It was around a few minutes before 2 a.m. And at least where I live, the electricity went down, and immediately we began to hear strikes and an unusual noise of aircrafts And thankfully, the area where we live is not so close to the place that we're targeted. So there was not panic around the people here. People were, of course, we were scared, but some of us, I mean, but the majority of the people, was at home, and in my case, I went outside and began to do a live on our YouTube channel just to record, what was happening, despite that there was no electricity, there was nothing. But anyway, in that live, people can hear the noise of the planes and of some explosions. So it lasted like 50 minutes, 1 hour, no more than that. And at the very beginning, I noticed that we were not, having, anti-aircraft artillery or something like that, and that surprised me, uh, to say the least. And I try, and I and I say it in the live that we had on YouTube. But anyway, I then went to an interview with RT News that called me because of what was happening. And since that moment, I mean, first, thankfully, the strike stopped, and then we began with like 2 or 3 days of constant interviews with foreign outlets, letting people know about what was happening, at least our position. And everything happened too fast. But the first important reaction from the government was this uh, meeting that Delcy Rodriguez had. uh, a, a, a few hours passed without us knowing exactly what was happening, and that was understandable also, because of the extraordinary situation. But like around 5 or 6 a.m. in the morning, there was this meeting of Delcy Rodriguez with all the leaders of the Venezuelan institutions and the Venezuelan PSUV, all the minister, everyone was there. And they just said that President Maduro was kidnapped, and that she was going to take temporarily the role of acting president. And, things began to be a little bit less stressful for many of us in terms of the continuation of the Bolivarian Revolution. Of course, we were in shock. We were outraged. We were. I don't know how to explain it. It's hard to explain it, but
Yeah.
in a few interviews that I have had, I have said that I feel like if I was violated, sexually violated, you know. I never have been, but I can imagine. So that's how I feel, the disgust, the hate, I don't know, it's something hard to explain, but that's was my feeling, at least for the last 3 or 4 days. It is still there, but you learn to process it, and try to not get into that. But that rage and that discussed, many of us translated into support Chavismo. And immediately on Saturday in the morning, there were already Chavista mobilizations, especially around Miraflores Palace. And people began to gather there in support of Chavismo, and that demonstration grew significantly, despite Venezuelans not knowing exactly what was really happening, and not knowing exactly if there was going to be a second or a third round of attacks from the U.S. And then since then, we have been having a massive Chavista demonstrations in support of President Maduro first, demanding the return of President Maduro, and 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 supporting Delcy Rodriguez, and supporting the government. And since then, also the government has been showing uh, a magnificent strength uh, that says a lot about what we have been saying for several months already, maybe years, about the strength of Chavismo and that showing that Chavismo is not its leadership. Chavismo is bigger than its leadership, and for that reason, and because of that strong root that did not exist, for example, in Syria, uh, uh, we are still in charge of the country, despite what President Trump is saying around the world. He's saying this is that he's controlling Venezuela, that he controls the world, but that's his narrative to try to, convince the gringos inside the U.S., especially, that he is the winner and we are the losers, and that is gringo stupidity about winning and losing, and but the reality is that we are in control, and Venezuela is moving forward. Actually, President Delcy a few minutes ago said that the government that is in charge right now in Venezuela is the government of Nicolás Maduro. That's how she said, and that she is just temporarily replacing him until he returns. That's what, I'm paraphrasing what she said, but it was something of the sort.
But then I have
And
to
she has
ask,
been saying that a lot. Go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
but then I have to ask this question. Yeah, yeah. So let me ask this question, because you've actually already answered most of my question. But I have to ask this: what plan of action can Venezuela try to do to retrieve President Maduro and his wife? Or is international law such an empty paper and a joke that the deck is stacked against Nicolas Maduro and his wife? I'm very curious your response.
Yes, international law is what you said. Actually, especially after what President Trump has been, doing. I mean, there's no respect for international law. But it's not something that you can attach only to Trump. It's something that goes beyond Trump. And that happened with Biden. That happened with Trump one. That happened with Obama two and one. I mean, that has been happening for several, decades already. But with this incredible and unusual and unprecedented violation of Venezuelan sovereignty for spurious reasons, and the kidnapping of an acting president like President Maduro is like worse than ever. And that particular feature of an acting president being kidnapped is, in my opinion, and from what I read from legal experts, not only in Venezuela but in the U.S., is one of the key elements to try to rescue him, at least to launch a legal battle to rescue him if negotiations are not possible, which is another scenario in which we have to move to try to rescue President Maduro, to bring him back home. But the fact that, I mean, we talk about Noriega, we talk about Aristide, we talk about Zelaya, like presence to what happened. But in those cases, the atrocity was not similar to what is happening. For example, Noriega was not acting president when he was kidnapped. He was the leader of the military junta, but he was not active president. The same in the case of Zelaya is different because the military in Honduras kidnapped him and then dropped it in the military base that the gringo have there. So there are different, matices, we say in Spanish, nuances, and but in the case of President Maduro, he is the first acting president being kidnapped and put in a U.S. jail. And head of a state, acting head of a state, has been protected for centuries with personal immunity as head of state. So, and the gringos might say that they don't recognize Maduro, but they recognize him during half of his mandate of his term, and they are accusing him of having committing crimes during those years also. So the legal case against and U.S. legislation recognize the immunity of a head of state. I'm just going into legal issues that might be boring for some people,
Very important, very important. So all good.
that responds to your question. You know, I'm trying to respond to your question about what we will do. So the legal battle is going to be there. The diplomatic negotiations are going to be there. So I believe that eventually, especially for the way President Maduro has been behaving even after he was captured, I believe that there will be a mass, and the way that people, not only in Venezuela, but outside Venezuela, has been rejecting what the U.S. did. So I'm expecting that the U.S. is going to have also a public opinion problem if they don't, manage properly what will happen with President Maduro, because it's extremely different to what they did against Noriega, for example. So I hope that I answered somehow your questions.
Yes, you did, and thank you very much for your response. Joe, can you briefly, if it's possible, spend some time debunking the propaganda and the big lies regarding the U.S. mobster piracy acts of Venezuela and kidnapping Nicolas Maduro? Before you respond, the U.S. injustice fake law system accuses President Nicolas Maduro of engaging in drug trafficking, of storing cocaine and fentanyl in tiny boats, what the U.S. has justified blowing up these boats. Another epic lie is Nicolas Maduro has ties to a Venezuelan drug cartel gang, Tren de Agua, which Jesus and Saheli, several months ago, we discussed last year that this is not a gruesome, all-powerful drug gang like MS-13 of El Salvador, nothing like the very powerful Mexican drug cartels or even the heyday of the Colombian drug cartels of the Medellin crew, the ones that and the ones that came after Pablo Escobar. And yet, the U.S. injustice system, uh, I have read or I've heard they are lumping, these local gangs, which is not that powerful in Venezuela itself. They are accusing Maduro of working with Tren de Leguar, FARC, Sinaloa, and the Zetas cartels of Mexico. And of course, the other reason, which they don't say so much as loud, but it is still part of it, ending the brutal left-wing dictatorship of Venezuela that has plunged people into misery, blah, blah, blah. Joe, your response, followed by Jesus.
You forgot to mention Cartel de los Soles. Sorry to interrupt you, Joe, because it's important that.
Yes, yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. The Sonora Mexican drug cartel. Joe, your response followed by Jesus.
Okay. I don't know. I'm not. I want to say this without being defeatist, but it doesn't matter. Like the U.S. will. Well, I'm going to write a piece. It's basically to say this. Look, if this goes to trial, Maduro will be found guilty. It does not matter how preposterous, how ridiculous the case is. He will be found guilty. Okay. But what matters is the reason for exposing the absurdity is to cause maximum embarrassment throughout not only the United States, but through the entire Western world, to maximize the political costs, to maximize their loss of prestige. To that's the real benefit of making these arguments of exposing all the absolute assault on rationality, on any semblance of decency in the law. That's the whole point. But the U.S. judiciary is utterly rotten. There is absolutely zero chance that they will do anything except what the United States foreign policy establishment wants it to do. We look at the case of Alex Saab, okay, the Venezuelan diplomat who was kidnapped by, or he was in that case he was extradited, but it was so brazenly legal. He had immunity as a diplomat. He should never have been touched. They touched him anyway. They treated him badly. They brought him to the United States. But he was released as a result of a prisoner exchange. Okay, it was negotiations, a prisoner exchange. Now, of course, there are all kinds of people writing, protesting, making the arguments, exposing the injustice. That's all important. That increases pressure. But ultimately, it was a prisoner exchange. Consider the Cuban Five. Okay, these were five Cuban intelligence agents who were convicted in the United States in 2001. They were arrested in 1998. They're convicted in 2001. Basically, they went in, infiltrated terrorist networks in South Florida. They were going to do terrorism in Cuba. They reported their findings to the FBI. Boom, they get arrested, thrown in prison, convicted of espionage, and they weren't finally released until 2014, till the last of them was released as a result of a prisoner exchange. Okay, you consider the case of other cases that I could bring up, but it's the same idea. What matters is the political costs, but the judiciary in the United States, it doesn't matter how preposterous the arguments are, how ridiculous. If U.S. foreign policy is at stake, it's not going to be the judiciary that saves anybody. Same with Julian Assange. You know what saved Julian Assange? The mass disapproval and the fact that they had already had him incarcerated for so long that basically decided just okay, we've proved our point, we've punished them, we don't want the headache of bringing this to the United States. Biden wasn't willing to go that far. But already throughout his case in the UK, which is an extension of a colonized part of the world, the United States, again, the judiciary was always willing to make the most idiotic, ridiculous, stupid rulings that had nothing to do with the law, nothing to do with common decency, nothing. Yeah, it was just outrageous. So I just want to make that point clear. It's the judiciary. You do not put any faith in the judiciary. You can embarrass them, you can ridicule them, but that's it. They will. It doesn't matter. They will take it. They will make whatever rulings their masters tell them to make. That's. I think people have to have that in mind.
And, if I have any criticisms to make of both the late Hugo Chavez and the leadership of Nicolas Maduro and other leftist governments across the region, is all of them should have ended, the drug war a long time ago. Treat drug abuse, nonviolent drug consumption as a public health and mental health matter, and end the discredited practice of, of prohibition. But that's another topic for another day. But that said, the Chavez and Maduro government did wage, a drug war, and as far as the drug trade goes, Venezuela has nothing to do with it. Most of the drugs, notably cocaine, is coming from Colombia, and it's largely not under Petro, but under successive, largely far right largely government sanctioned far right paramilitary groups and their links to these mobsters, drug cartels under far right governments that have been involved in the illicit drug trade, often with the blessing of the CIA. And I think even the fiercest critics of Chavez and Maduro, who hate them for their leftism, etc., have to concede that this rationale that Nicolas Maduro is in prison in the U.S. is a pack of lies. Jesus, what's your response to this, followed by Joe?
Yes, I mean it's an absurdity, and it's just an excuse to provoke a regime change that they wanted to do in Venezuela, but haven't happened despite kidnapping President Maduro, which is terrible for us. I have to acknowledge that it's a terrible, visual vision. I mean, it's terrible for us to look at those videos and images of President Maduro being treated like a criminal in a New York court. But what you say is correct. Venezuela has been certified by international organizations as a drug crop-free territory. There is no production of drugs in Venezuela, and I mean there might be some small, crops
Yeah.
here and there, but a massive production of marijuana or cocaine in Venezuela has been systematically exterminated by the Venezuelan army over the years, and most importantly during Chavez times and now with Maduro's government. Uh, but the most important producers of cocaine of the world are in South America. The most important one is Colombia, but then you have Bolivia and Peru. I'm talking about production. So Venezuela, because of its geographic position, is a place that is being used for years by drug cartels from those countries to transit cocaine, to allow the cocaine, to transport the cocaine from those countries, mainly to Europe, actually. Because most of those, bomb strike that the Southern Command launched since September, uh, not most of them, but some of them, the ones related to Venezuela, happen in the border with Trinidad and Tobago. And that is the eastern side of Venezuela. And from there, most of the cocaine goes to Europe. Because if you look at the map, Trinidad and Tobago is in the eastern part of the Caribbean Sea. So it's easy geographically talking to traffic to use that place to send drugs to Europe. I say that because the U.S. talk a lot about Venezuela and, invading with drugs the U.S. and that's a big lie. Another important thing is that out of all that cocaine that is produced in South America, only between 5 or 7% of that cocaine passes through Venezuela. The big chunk of that cocaine goes to the U.S. through the Pacific. And it's important also to say that out of the 115 civilians that has been killed so far, because we don't know if they already decided to stop those atrocious strike in the region. But even when you analyze the statistics of those strikes, you notice that since October and November, the number of strikes in the Caribbean were less than the numbers of strikes in the Pacific. So most of those U.S. strikes that has been happening for over 5 months, 4 or 5 months, and now the majority of them and the majority of the victims has been strikes that have been happening on the Pacific Ocean. But they keep, blurring that reality just to keep pushing Venezuela of being, a narco-terrorist state. Actually, in the last 2 or 3, announcement from the Southern Command, they actually now they were not saying in what part of the region the strike happened. Before they usually mention the Caribbean Sea or Eastern Pacific. But in the last 2, if you notice, posts from the Southern Command on X, that's easily, verifiable. You will notice that they blur that part because they don't need to say exactly where those operations happen because they need to blame Venezuela for whatever reason and whatever way they can. So it's an absurdity. But they managed to convince a lot of MAGA supporters to
well, it doesn't take
join them.
It doesn't take much to convince MAGA supporters to believe the dumbest lies. I mean, they kind of smell their own BS most of the time, anyways.
Joe can comment what I said.
Yeah. Joe, what's your response to the big lie about Nicolas Maduro being part of this big, vast drug smuggling network and so forth? Your response before I get to the next question.
Yeah, it's so ridiculous that step one, if Maduro wanted to be a drug lord, would be to ally himself with the United States. To basically, that's the number one thing you have to do to become a drug lord and be successful and be. I mean, Juan Orlando Fernandez was just not quitted. He was pardoned by Trump for drug trafficking. He was arrested after he's finished his term as president of Honduras. He was a right-wing U.S. ally. After he finished his term as president, the Honduran authorities arrested him, and the United States extradited him to the United States, where he faced charges for drug trafficking. And it was all, long story, but bottom line, he was convicted, and then Trump pardoned him. Okay, because really he doesn't care about drugs. He doesn't care less. I mean, in Afghanistan, the drug trade went from 0 under the Taliban. They reduced it to 0. It skyrocketed under 20 years of U.S. occupation. The United States launders hundreds of billions of dollars of illegal drug money through its banks. I mean, they talk so much about the drugs coming to the United States, but obviously those drugs don't move themselves within the United States. They're moved by and the money, the proceeds are pocketed in U.S. banks. So this is all just an extremely brazen lie, propaganda talk point. I mean, Noboa in Ecuador is a huge. Under Noboa, Ecuador has become a major drug trafficking hub. His own company of his family's business has been implicated in, has been caught selling cocaine in their banana containers. They're major banana exporters.
Wow.
So I mean, none of this ever, like I said, if Maduro wanted to enrich himself as a drug lord shipping cocaine, the first thing he would have to do is make himself, basically renounce the Bolivarian Revolution completely and sell out to the United States. That would be step one if you wanted to become a drug lord. So the whole accusation is preposterous right there, and that's why you see that Venezuela has such a small part of the drug trade is because they're not allied with the United States. You cannot get away with being a drug lord unless you have the permission of the world's biggest drug lord, which is the United States. Okay, but the other thing too is that going back to the law, if the law meant anything, if the law was not a joke, all a judge would have to say is, okay, where do you say these look at the indictment. I've read the indictment. Where did he say he moved drugs in Venezuela? He doesn't say anything about Maduro doing anything in the United States. And so the judge should almost sarcastically ask, well, wait a second, where are we? Are we in Caracas or are we in New York? Okay, he's the president of Venezuela. The stuff is happening in Venezuela. He's the acting president of Venezuela. He obviously, whether he's legitimate or not is irrelevant. He's running the country. His government is still running the country even now, even though he's been kidnapped. So legally, the judge should just throw it out based on lack of jurisdiction. In fact, U.S. courts do throw cases out for all the time because of lack of jurisdiction, but they do so when it's in favor of U.S. interests or U.S. corporate interests. I'll just give one example. Steve Donziger came to New York in 1993 to sue Chevron for damage that it had done in Ecuador, toxic waste that it had dumped in Ecuador for decades. They went through a legal court battle, but ultimately the court said, you know what? This happened in Ecuador. Go to Ecuador. It's Ecuador's business, not ours, not our jurisdiction. So what happened in Ecuador? Chevron unpleasantly got surprised by the leftist government of Rafael Correa. The judiciary changed. They, instead of getting everything they wanted, like they were accustomed to, they got billions of dollars in damages to the victims in courts in Ecuador. So then what happened? The Chevron came running back to the United States, and the court said, oh, no, this is our jurisdiction. And they ended up throwing Steve Donziger in jail in the United States because he won a case in Ecuador. So when it didn't suit them, nothing to do with us, not our jurisdiction. But when they wanted to protect Chevron and punish Donziger for beating them, then it's like, oh yeah, this is all our business. This is our case. This is our jurisdiction. So again, if the law meant anything, this case would be thrown out. But we know that the U.S. judiciary is just rotten, and they'll just rule whatever the foreign policy elites want.
And I also should mention
let me add something. Let me add something, Youri, that I forgot.
Yeah.
Give me 1 second. I mean, Trump in his Saturday press conference about Venezuela mentioned oil 27 times. I read that in a report by Venezuelan outlet, Jean-Bertrand. So you can imagine, and since this U.S. attack, you don't have here too much about drugs in Venezuela. Washington only talks about oil. So that gives you an idea of what's the reality, here.
Yes, Donald Trump really is the fugly American, or the fugglier American. And actually, something I have to piggy bank on what Joe was saying is it's amazing how the crooks in the U.S. and Britain and Australia and New Zealand and France, European Union and Germany, what I call the pan-European imperialists or the pan-European mobsters. It's amazing how they pick and choose when. It's amazing just how they pick and choose the law when it suits their purpose. So, so something like. Anyways, it's absolutely ridiculous how the U.S. Is not a signatory to even international law. So basically, they're in organized piracy. It's amazing how Britain can just pick and choose, even though they're a signatory to international law, but they can just pick and choose. Nope, sorry, that doesn't apply to us. Nope, sorry, we're going to continue to torture Julian Assange and so forth until he breaks. And it's just so blood boiling. And then you look at how Haiti, time after time, has been completely destroyed under the banner of the United Nations, and then NATO, and then that's a whole nother racket even then, because NATO never even attacks. You know, I mean, NATO keeps attacking countries which aren't even members of NATO, so it's just unbelievable. And you know, there's so much disinformation and a desire, it seems, for all kinds of leftist and anti-imperialist voices and others to get a good scoop or whatever. And there's been a lot of bad takes or weird takes. And let's clarify, because it needs to be, because I think we need to debunk them, because it has my head spinning. So first off, let's explain how the U.S. was able to cut off Venezuela's electricity, swoop in and kidnap Nicolas Maduro, because some people have been saying this must have been an inside job, and there have been people who have said that the current acting president, who was Maduro's VP, if I'm not mistaken, the sort of caretaker government that the Supreme Court of Venezuela gave a blessing to, that's Delcy Rodriguez, who Jesus was explaining earlier. Corporate media is strongly suggesting that she will make a deal with Trump and the Western world to give cheap oil from Venezuela, remove all sanctions, and allow Western multinational oil and mining companies to do business in Venezuela in exchange for Maduro and the First Lady to return. Tariq Ali of the New Left Review, longtime Pakistani British historian, anti-war activist, leftist journalist who had a show on Telesur for quite a while, he claimed on his Facebook,
And Trotskyist.
he claimed on his Facebook that someone within the government of Venezuela who he trusts thinks that Madame Rodriguez is a traitor who's going to sell out the Bolivarian Revolution. And yeah, so who would like to respond to that? And who also wants to respond to the other bizarre takes that many anti-imperialist and left-wing websites and voices claim, that this act of aggression isn't about oil, which I also find is quite frankly is a dumb take, and I have no idea what people are trying to prove making statements like that. So I'm curious, as is your response, followed by Joe.
There are several, trends with that narrative, One is that there was a negotiation, a backdoor negotiation, and which is an absurdity, because if you see what happened, it's evident that there was not a negotiation, because if a negotiation was there, maybe Maduro took a plane, a U.S. Department of State jet, and ended up in I don't know, in Cuba, Russia, or Turkey, or Iran, or wherever. But that's not what happened. So the possibility of negotiation is not supported by the facts, Another trend in that narrative is that Delcy Rodriguez is a traitor, which doesn't, align with what I just told you, that the whole unity of the Chavista leadership and state institutions in Venezuela is behind her. You don't see a single crack there. At least it's not visible. I mean, I can understand, some people being mad for the way Maduro was kidnapped. That's understandable. And many of us have been saying since Saturday that eventually we will know exactly what happened and why we didn't saw, more anti-aircraft artillery in Venezuela, at least. That we were not able to at least down a couple of helicopters or something like that. Some people in Venezuela have been launching these theories that the gringos apply some incredible and new technological, weapons and machines that basically black out all the anti-aircraft and military communications and everything. I mean, that might be part of the reality, but if it says a lot about how bad we prepare for the attack. Also, you know what I mean?
I would just say before I allow Joe to jump in and chime in, I would just say that I think it makes perfect sense that the U.S. was able to to sabotage the electricity, swoop in, and kidnap Nicolas Maduro, because this is what the U.S. does all the time. I mean, there's a reason why the U.S. There's a reason why the U.S. spends endless money on its military, on its deep state, on its surveillance, on militarizing the police at the expense of healthcare, education, and so forth.
Listen. But countries need to prepare for that scenario, and we were in Venezuela being prepared for that scenario. I mean, cutting the electricity is not the biggest thing.
Your country's your country's faced monstrous economic terrorism and sabotage and so forth.
But anyway, just to finish my line of thought, I just mentioned that because I understand that some people might feel like that, and that's understandable. But what we have been saying is that eventually we will know what happened. You know, that if they were traitors, we will see them, being brought to justice or to the public or things like that. But from there to claiming that Delcy Rodriguez, which has a huge history within Chavismo, she is not new there. She has been there since President Hugo Chavez was in power. So to talk about that is like playing the game that the far right and the U.S. want us to play, to create division, especially inside Venezuela, inside the Chavista forces, but also to create division among those supporting Venezuela abroad. So for that reason, we believe, and we are very clear that that trend is not the right one.
Joe, your response.
Sorry, I'm mute. Yeah, listen, and Ecuador was betrayed by Lenin Moreno. If you think back to that betrayal, Lenin Moreno campaigned as a loyal Correaist in Ecuador in 2017. Basically, within weeks of taking power, he exposed himself, took his mask off, and was a traitor and governed exactly as the right wing would. And what were the characteristics you saw from that betrayal? Immediately attacking Correa, immediately attacking Correismo, immediately throwing mud at everything they'd accomplished. We don't see that in Delcy Rodriguez. We see nothing like that. Okay, that's the first giveaway that somebody's being betrayed, is that if she wants to betray, she has the military, she has everything. Why isn't she throwing Maduro on the bus? Why isn't she saying, you know what? Yeah, we think he was a drug trafficker or something like that. Yeah, she's not saying stuff like that at all. Nothing like that. Okay, so that's one thing to keep in mind. It doesn't look like, when we've seen betrayals, I've seen betrayals, political betrayals. I know what they look like, and they don't look like this. Okay, and as Jesus says very, very wisely, it's obviously in the United States' interest to say that, to spread that, and to try to generate distrust and split. They've been doing that for decades now. They've for decades trying to generate splits within Chavismo, buying people off. They have bought people off. And what do those people do? They throw Maduro on the who are the star witnesses against Maduro in New York? Former Venezuelan officials who will say anything. Like one of the star witnesses in the indictment against Maduro is claiming that Maduro helped Biden steal the 2020 election. He's claiming that Maduro has U.S. spies and U.S. officials on his payroll. I mean, this guy will say anything, that's no matter how crazy, against Maduro to try to get himself some leniency. That's Carvajal, this former intelligence officer. So the United States buys people. But when you see traitors, their characteristic behavior is to throw their former allies completely under the bus and say they're the worst and they're capable of anything. Basically, it's like they become mini Trumps. They become like Lee Trump, and that's not Delcy Rodriguez. That's not the Chavista leadership that's in charge right now. Like Jesus says, keep your eye on the ball. And remember, Chavismo has been preparing for U.S. invasion and sabotage, but they've not been preparing. I don't think. How can you prepare for a kidnapping using massive, overwhelming firepower that takes place in 2 hours? I mean, this wasn't it's one thing to prepare for an invasion, right? Where they come in with 100,000 troops and you have to fight them over decades, like in Vietnam. But it's a total different matter to say you have to defeat them in the first 2 hours. Who defeats the United States in the first 2 hours? When does that happen? It didn't happen in Vietnam. Didn't happen in Afghanistan. Doesn't happen anywhere. Okay, maybe the only place you can think of is the Bay of Pigs in Cuba. But that wasn't real. That was the U.S. That was U.S. Exiles, U.S. Puppets trying to do U.S. dirty work and failing miserably. But it wasn't U.S. troops setting a massive force of U.S. troops into Cuba. That didn't happen. So I think we have to be a little. And yeah, I know you could say, well, should they have done better? Maybe, and we can't rule out that some elements there might have been betrayals or something going on there. But to say that the Delcy Rodriguez and the whole leadership has this grand conspiracy to betray Maduro, that just
an inside job. And do you want to respond? We're gonna talk a bit more about the bad left coverage, but do you want to respond to Tariq Ali saying this on his Facebook, that he has a source in the Venezuelan government that says Delcy's not to be trusted?
that's so idiot. That's so infantile. Who, I mean, like, I have friends in Venezuela, I have friends in Canada, can say all kinds of things. I mean, who takes that seriously? I mean, Tariq Ali is not. He's a trot. He runs a magazine where the staff was actually debating during the genocide in Gaza about whether they should call it genocide. And then Tariq Ali's response to that was, well, I wasn't aware of any such debate. He's the guy who runs the magazine. So I mean, he's just not a credible person. He's a Trotskyist and not a credible person. And even if he were credible, I mean, he should lose his credibility if his idea for his grand conspiracy. Some guy I know in Venezuela told me. I wrote a piece the other day where I talk about Chomsky and his disgrace. And at one point, me emailing Chomsky, he suggested to me that Boris Munoz is a credible source on Venezuela. And I said, Boris Munoz? That's the guy who said that Chavez was faking his illness. How is he a credible source? Like people, and even people who have like a lot of stature, go to sources that are garbage and feed people garbage, and we shouldn't take that.
That's a perfect segue to this. So now, something I really wanted all of your response, and no doubt it'll make several of our comrades and friends and people we correspond to on and off in our left-wing universe and whatnot pissed off when we discuss the following, and that's this. So we're year 3 into Israel's mass murder known as the Gaza genocide, along with its endless dispossession of Palestinians in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. From Haiti being ruthlessly attacked by so-called UN peacekeepers trying to solve a stupid mobster turf war between the elites in Haiti, we see the rise of the far right in Chile, Honduras, which was totally Western meddling, and more to overturn the left there. Trump, as you both mentioned, as Joe mentioned, Trump pardoning a corrupt far right drug dealing mobster to return to that country. Peru, the loyal servant to Western imperialism, Dina Boluarte. Now, that was definitely a betrayal, who betrayed President Pedro Castillo. She's been ousted, and now a new far-right party is ruling Peru again, and Pedro Castillo was found guilty of bogus treason charges and whatnot, and is in prison in Peru. Bolivia, the far right, is back in power. Imran Khan of Pakistan is still in prison, though some people fear that he's been murdered. We see color revolutions in Nepal and Bangladesh, where once more legitimate grievances become protests, and now neoliberal pro-Western stooges, are back in power. And then, we see the rotten. Then we see in Iran, whatever one thinks of the Islamic Republic of Iran is being targeted yet again by Western-backed color revolutions, and Israel continues to light Lebanon on fire. Syria is descending into hell with the Western-backed ISIS government in power there, and the U.S. has made threats to Cuba, Colombia, and Mexico. They've threatened regime change for Colombia, and the same goes for Colombia and Mexico, both under left-wing governments, but under the banner of Cuba supporting terrorism and being a communist hellhole. And Colombia and Mexico, if you don't handle your drug cartels, we'll do it for you. And now, 2-decade-long psychological warfare, economic terrorism, and a mercenary campaign led by Eric Prince, one of the many butchers of Iraq, has culminated into the U.S. invading once more a Latin American country, kidnapping the president and his spouse to face charges for drug trafficking, and is vowing to completely rearrange the body politics and socioeconomics of that country. Why do I mention all of this? Because China and Russia, BRICS, the rise of multipolarity. I have to say this, if it ever showed the severe limitation of BRICS, of multipolarity, specifically of China and Russia, it has to be what happened in Venezuela. And I'm quite surprised that there are many people thinking China and Russia are playing some kind of smooth chess game, or they have their hands tied back. So what could they have possibly do? Or the West has outmaneuvered them. But I don't buy it. So I'm curious your responses. Let's start with Joe, followed by Jesus on yeah, China, Russia, the severe limitation of BRICS, multipolarity, and whatnot.
Yeah. Well, remember that even when the Soviet Union existed, the United States bombed the hell out of Vietnam, killed millions of people, and throughout that part of the world, killed probably up around 4 million people. And that's with the Soviet Union in existence and helping the Vietnamese and others. So it's worth. You could make a case that maybe the Cuban Missile Crisis, Khrushchev ultimately wasn't up to the job. They should have really held firm and kept the missiles in Cuba, because the world would be better off. It might even be better off if there had been a brief exchange of weapons inflicting mass death on the United States, just to rein in the empire to prevent them from killing millions of people in Vietnam and throughout the world afterwards. So even with a countervailing, a counter hegemon, with a countervailing force in the world, the Western imperialism is still very powerful and very dangerous. So with Russia and China, even though they counter Western imperialism, they have limitations. They are much farther away from Venezuela than the United States, unfortunately. But I do caution people against some certain specialists on China and especially Russia, who when they analyze Venezuela or they analyze Syria, or it's always with an eye to basically absolving the states, China, of any wrongdoing or any inappropriate response. So I'd caution against that, because I've seen some of the ugliest conspiracy theorizing I'm seeing about Venezuela is coming from people like Scott Ritter, Mark Sloboda, and others who are specialized in Russia. Okay, so I would ask people to be careful about that. But with regards to China, they when China and Russia refused to veto the resolution a really genocidal resolution that the United States recently passed, that was something you can't excuse. That was something they had the power to do, and they just didn't do it for whatever reason. They in Russia's case, they have ties to Israel. In China's case, maybe they didn't want to jeopardize business deals with the Arab clients of the U.S. in the region. But whatever their rationale was, it was unjustified. So in that case, definitely 100% no excuse. Nobody should take any excuses there. But in the case of Venezuela, remember, I mean, Venezuela has been it was a middle income country in 2013 or 2013 when it was at its peak under Chavez, and then briefly under Maduro. But then since the sanctions, the collapse in oil prices, it's drifted back down. So it's very hard over those period of time to try to address. I mean, Venezuela has defeated the economic war, and so that's why we have these escalations. But on the other case, to defeat an economic war and massively arm yourself, I mean, that's, I think, asking too much. You can't do both. Unless, I mean, you can say, well, China and Russia just giving them weapons for free, but it's very hard to do that. It's very hard to in bottom line, they're further away than. It's not like Venezuela is not unfortunately on China's doorstep or on Russia's. So that's I think a problem. It's unfortunately geography puts you closer to the U.S. So
Zeus, before you started Orinoco Tribune, you were a diplomat. And and Orinoco Tribune, does great critical coverage of international affairs from a critical leftist perspective. Your response to China and Russia, do you find that this shows the severe limitations of BRICS and the thesis that many of our anti-imperialist left-wing friends say that that multipolarity and BRICS is going to rise and counter Western imperialism? Do you find when it comes to Venezuela, but even when it comes to the genocide in Gaza, that severe limitations when it comes to Russia and China? Curious your response.
Let me. I mean, I believe that the same narrative that we were talking before is similar to this narrative against Russia and China role in what happened in Venezuela. I have the impression that this narrative also aims at breaking, the rising powers that China and Russia are, and no one can discuss that. Despite if BRICS is good or bad, despite that, the most important thing that is happening and that is forcing the U.S. to do what they has been doing in recent months is that they has been losing relative weight in the war scenario. I'm not talking about decline because I believe that that's a course war already because for decades people have been talking about U.S. decline and no one comes to see it. But the fact is that the U.S. is losing. I mean, U.S. was here 2 or 3 decades ago in the worst scenario, and right now U.S. is here. Meaning that this other part of the world are the racing powers like China mostly, or Russia, or India, or Iran. So that for that reason is what they has been doing, in recent months, not only against Venezuela, but against the whole hemisphere. I mean, the whole American continent, as we call it, and that as it should be called. And for that reason, they are talking about Greenland, they are talking about Canada, they are talking about the Gulf of Mexico, they are talking about Venezuela, Panama, the Argentinian Patagonia. The idea is to regain control of this part of the world because in the other part of the world, they don't have that, possibility so feasible. You know what I mean? So that's the first thing that I wanted to say about that. I encourage anyone that listen to us not to fall into that trap. I like to be frank. And as a Venezuelan, as a Venezuelan, felt somehow bad because they did not do anything. But but that's more like a, like a personal, spiritual thing than the fact, and we actually has been saying for several months already since this craziness began against Venezuela, that we were not expecting the Chinese or the Russian government to, jump into, like in a military alliance of the 19th century or the 20th century, maybe, to jump into Venezuela and defend Venezuela for the gringos. That was not in the scenarios. But anyway, I felt somehow that maybe the Russians or the Chinese might have done something better. But that's also part of our responsibility as a country. Maybe we didn't ask them to do something, to give us some tools, to give us some technology to avoid what happened. But anyway, that's part of also the frustration that a Venezuelan feels after what we have been seeing for the last days. But anyway, I mean, what I told you at the beginning, I mean, no one, I mean, and what Joe said, I mean, Russia and China are extremely intertwined into the Venezuelan economy, into the Venezuelan state, but that doesn't mean that they are going to jump and send missiles to the U.S. because they kidnap President Maduro. That's not going to happen.
Oh, I wish
we
it
need
did
to
happen.
Yes.
And I think you're being too soft on Russia and China. But hey, that's just my humble opinion. But then,
Can I
yeah,
just say
Joe,
though,
go ahead.
like I said, Venezuela defeated the economic war again that the United States has waged on them. They cannot get by with they've in terms of just their usual sanctions. They've thrown everything they had. Now they're into armed blockade. Now they're into bombing Caracas and kidnapping the president. They've gone beyond. Why? Because of China, because of Iran, because of Russia. Venezuela has defeated those sanctions. They defeated that level of
right.
war. So that's what forced Trump to go to this next level.
Interesting. Then, very quickly, if possible, there's another narrative that keeps coming out of Western corporate media and Western state media from people who more or less do support the U.S.'s actions on Venezuela, but differ with their approach. And then there are voices, some liberal and others left-leaning who say the following: if Trump can do this to Venezuela, what's to stop Russia from continuing to do this to Ukraine and Europe, or China doing this to Taiwan? Jesus, your response, then Joe. and you don't have to spend too much time on this one, but just very curious your response to that.
Yes,
Jesus,
I
first,
believe that
your response, then Joe.
I believe that's part of the U.S. hypocrisy, and it's true. I ask myself, what will stop President Putin to go to Kiev and kidnap Zelensky? Why not? If the gringos did it, or why the Chinese, military do, do not go and invade Taiwan, because Taiwan has been recognized for most of the countries of the world as an intrinsic part of the Chinese territory. So I'm not against that line of thinking. Maybe if you analyze it coming from liberals or far right people, is bad, but the reality is that that's part of the hypocrisy in the world, scenario. And I can say a lot of things against the U.S. liberals and the Democrats that try to portray themselves like the good guys now, just because they want to win the next midterm election, and making beautiful anti-imperialistic speeches. I've seen several of them from some Congress people in the U.S. from the Democratic Party.
Oh, you're
And
not
you say,
talking.
wow.
You're not talking about wonderful AOC and wonderful Bernie Sanders, are you?
No, 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 no.
Or Mamdani
I
of New
blocked them.
York.
Yesterday I watched a video from an Illinois Ramirez, I believe that is her name, making this amazing video that you believe such that she is like Patria o Muerte, a political, Marxist Carol, and you say, I'm pretty sure that this woman voted for Marco Rubio a few months ago to confirm him, so I don't trust them. So, but that's another discussion, and I'm sure that Joe might add a few things to that.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
Joe, so Joe, what do you think of this? Of some of the responses that, they try to portray themselves as anti-war, or I mean,
Yeah.
certainly, yeah, who say, "Oh my gosh, if the U.S. can do this to Maduro, what's to stop Russia from doing this to Ukraine and the rest of Eastern Europe? What's to stop China from doing it to Taiwan?" And yeah, your response.
Well, yeah, they're worried about the propaganda because they know they'll have no their propaganda points against. Well, first of all, Russia's invasion against of Ukraine has been vindicated. It was the right thing to do. The Western imperialism understands and respects nothing but brute force. If Russia doesn't want a massive military threat on its doorstep, it had to take decisive military action. It's pointless to negotiate, and if you're as strong as Russia, it would be absolutely stupid to try to negotiate or play diplomacy. Putin tried that for actually too long, and he finally, as to my surprise, got his act together and actually just took effective action. I was uncomfortable with it at first, but the more you see of Western savagery, the more you realize, no, he did the right thing for Russia. He did the right thing for Russia doing that. I don't know that I could not, obviously I could not object if China decided to take Taiwan militarily, bring it completely back into the fold that way. But who could possibly object to that? I mean, why should they allow any threat to them to exist? If they have the power to neutralize a threat, they should do it, not wait. No, liberals have no leg to stand on. Obviously, they have no leg to stand on. They go full. They completely, all these liberals who are denouncing Trump now, they're fully supported Biden. Biden's one of the worst butchers ever in the history of man. I mean, he is mankind. He sponsored the Holocaust in Gaza. He got it going. So he's one of the worst butchers ever. So, and they all support, all of them. Bernie Sanders, AOC, they all love the guy. Talked about how wonderful he is. They're all just two factions of the same fascist party. So
Exactly,
that's all.
and also I'll just add this. Uh, when it comes to Ukraine, like I wish that Russia had not invaded. It is an awful war. I do have a friend from Ukraine, from Kharkiv, who's lost family members in Ukraine, and so I do understand her very legitimate grievances against Putin and so forth like that. But as an independent journalist, as a guy who fancies himself as a as a lefty history buff and so forth like that, it was not Russia's invasion of Ukraine that started this tragedy. It was Western imperialism. It was the West ousting Viktor Yanukovych, empowering the most reactionary far-right forces in Ukraine who lionized Stepan Bandera and whatnot. And that very government's attack on eastern Ukraine, on the Donbass, which led to Russia's invasion. I think it's very important to mention that. And as for Taiwan, I mean, well, the international community more or less said, okay, China, if you want Taiwan back, you more or less can have Taiwan back, and I'll just end it, and I'll just end it, like that. I mean, because that is so. But the last question I wanted to ask is this. And I'll say this also. All is not doom and gloom. There have been great protests and incredible last-minute emergency demonstrations and wonderful acts of compassion, solidarity given to Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, who I apologize for leaving her name aside earlier. Do you guys want to talk about this? And in the final response, specifically from Joe, you have the awful job of being a media critic and NGO critic and going through hours and hours of debunking propaganda and junk journalism and more. But you don't limit yourself to just being a media critic of corporate media. You and Jesus, also go after the largely Western state media like BBC, CBC, ABC, Australian TVNZ. And I had you on last year because you did a very informative thread on the many supposedly left-leaning leftist publications voiced in people who act as if they are the best friends of Palestinian liberation justice, but either recycle the propaganda coming from Israel and its supporters, shitting on Palestinian resistance, and largely still keeping the information and the information warfare and the movement kneecapped. You on Substack warned readers and left-wing anti-imperialist audience the same regarding Venezuela going forward. Explain the outlets and voices that you are warning about and why. And going forward, outlets people should be subscribed to and voices people should be following. You don't have to explain why, but feel free to, and then I'll close this out. So Joe, your response followed by Jesus. Oh, and I also want to add, if you also want to feel free to speak out on the governments of Colombia, Brazil, and Chile under Gabriel Boric have also done a huge disservice, much like the left, largely in the West, but even elsewhere, who shit on Maduro before defending Venezuela, or they shit on both Chavez and Maduro before defending Venezuela, or you have the once upon a time, the folks who defended Chavez but then throw Maduro under the bus, because like Aristide, a popular socialist Democrat, if you defend Maduro against any or all these allegations, I think you'll find yourself getting an avalanche of hostility from people who have, according to my friend Alfred Desaias, swimming in an ocean of lies and fake news, fake law, fake history, and more. Joe, your response followed by Jesus.
Well, I mean, I don't do that much media criticism anymore, to be honest. I've kind of diversified myself away from that because, I've been doing it for decades. I wrote a book about it, and frankly, I'm really tired of it, and I think it's kind of limiting in some ways too.
Yeah.
One way I think it keeps you from following alternative outlets. So the people I recommend, and bear in mind, nobody's infallible. Nobody, no matter how good the source are, people can get it wrong. People can make mistakes. People can have misguided. So you always there's no getting around having to use your own brain when you accept sources, or when you look at sources. But there's sources that I trust, and I listed them in that piece. Obviously Jesus and his Orinoco Tribune, obviously Camila Escalante, Ali Vargas, very, very good on Latin America, and Mint Press News. I mean, savagely attacked, trying to kneecap their funding because they've been doing such good. Al McLeod, who writes for them, is excellent. Arnold August, he's a very good writer, often on Telesur English, and I'm sorry if I've forgotten any. There's a bunch I mentioned. I put them all in the piece. I just gave them and I said, look, this is not meant to be exhaustive or anything. It's just a way for people to identify some sources that I consider good. That'll give you some good perspective, and and avoid a lot of the pitfalls. And I warn people against some outlets that I no longer respect. I used to respect a lot, no longer respect. One of them is CPR. They still do some good work, but they are totally devoted to like the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. They will never say anything that will attack somebody like Bernie. No matter how disgusting he behaves, they will never attack Bernie Sanders. Francisco Rodriguez is part of CPR for a while now. He just wrote an absolutely disgusting op-ed in the New York Times referring to the attack on Caracas as a surgical strike and an extraordinary military raid. Didn't say a single word about the victims. Didn't say a single word about the illegality. And that's just and just plenty of other disgusting things. And that's in the New York. He puts himself in the New York Times saying this. So a big establishment outlet. The other group I no longer trust anymore. They've lost about 3/4 of their staff recently because of their anti-Maduro kind of slant that's taken them over. Is Venezuela Analysis, which is very sad because I've got a lot of pieces up on Venezuela Analysis. I've always been always used to for decades one of my first places to go, besides Jesus or whatever, but one of the first places I go for information on Venezuela. So yeah, it's unfortunate, but they've kind of gone to this ultra left idea of and I wrote about that in my piece, and so yeah, it's unfortunate, but those are the. But still, I still read them, to be honest. I still look at what they have to say, but I don't trust their. Well, at the end of the day, I don't trust their analysis because I feel like it comes from a very anti-Maduro place that is totally inappropriate. So that's what I had to say about that.
And does that also and we can mention her name. Does a lot of that come from Eva Gollinger? I remember her.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I forgot about her.
Because I remember her from the shop.
Yeah. She wrote a lot of good stuff up until 2012. She was very supportive of the government, but then around 2013, though, she exposed herself as being when Chavez died. After Chavez died, shortly afterwards, she pretty much exposed herself as a total opportunist, and really you get that from her own book. I mean, her last book that she wrote in 2018. I did a thread on it, going through just screenshotting quotes straight from the book, just to show the kind of narcissist and opportunist she's been, has exposed herself to be. And she's out there promoting this, Dulce's betrayed Maduro conspiracy theory, really promoting it hard. And yeah, nobody should trust her. I mean, she's a joke. So yeah, definitely do not trust her.
And Jesus, what's your response to people who I don't even know how to even frame this anymore because it's just so frustrating. But just what's your response to people who I think there are two kinds of voices who want to have it both ways. They want to be anti-war, anti-imperialist, but they want to shit on what's ultimately a very radical social democratic project, which was the Bolivarian revolution of both Hugo Chavez and Maduro. So you get people who do the following. You'll have people who actually will defend Chavez and will defend Chavez's legacy, and I'm sure they'll cite my hero, John Pilger. They'll cite, the War on Democracy and so forth, and then and so forth. But then they'll shit on Maduro and say that Maduro was a Democrat. That Maduro was autocratic, and that Maduro, became corrupt and mishandled the economy and so forth. And then you'll have people who I think these are just right wingers who will shit on both Chavez and Maduro, but you will have people who will say the following: whatever you think of Maduro, we can't allow this to happen. And even if you dislike Maduro, and yes, Maduro has done this and that, but we should not be supporting Western imperial actions. I'm curious, what's your response to that? And that's why I also had to bring up Lula shitting on Maduro. Petro, Joe has been speaking out on Twitter how Petro of Colombia, who first started off doing great détentes with Venezuela, he feels the need to shit on shit on Maduro, and of course the best example, Gabriel Borg, who I think represents perfectly that Latin American diaspora, or even those within the region who feel the need to be hostile towards Cuba, to be hostile towards Daniel Ortega and the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, and of course, shitting on Maduro. I'm very curious. Yeah, I'm very curious your response to
Mhm. First, going to the credible sources, you are making questions too complicated lately. Let me tell you that. But anyway, I'm gonna try to go in order. If I forget something, let me know. But going back to the credible sources, I agree with most of what Joe said. But of course, I believe that one have to preserve the few, at least in the case of Venezuela and information about Venezuela, the few outlets, the very scarce outlets that are out there, uh, uh, trying to present Venezuela in a different way. So in that sense, I give the chance of the doubt to Venezuela analysis. But for the rest of what Joe said, I agree with him 100%. And going back to the liberal, we already talked about that. I mean, Bernie Sanders just posted something that Joe bombarded yesterday about Maduro being a dictator, and then criticizing. So that's like the we say guabinoso, slimy. You say in English. We
that.
say guabinoso in Spanish, which is the person that goes, you know,
Oh.
how do you say
Slimy,
it in
slimy,
English?
slippery. Yeah, slimy.
Yeah, yeah,
Slimy,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
exactly. So those are, I mean, and most of the liberals are like that. And you found countless people, replicating that stupidity that it was when you read the statements from Europe, for example, about what happened in Venezuela, or this recent one that was signed for several countries in the presidency in South America, including the Spain one. A lot of people were happy about that, but when you read those statements, you notice that is it. They use the same slimery, narrative about, okay, we oppose, the violation of Venezuela's sovereignty, but we want a peaceful transition in Venezuela, and that the Venezuelans choose the right government, and you notice there that they are trying to play both bands, So, 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 so. So that the same thing happened with these people. I believe, anyways, I believe that there was this trend, and it's premeditated and prefabricated of people doing that. That I love Maduro, but I hate. Pardon, sorry. That I love Chavez, but I hate Maduro. That was something premeditated. I have the impression since Maduro took office that was something fabricated, premeditatedly designed to create this sort of division among Chavistas that never happened. Yes, and there were just a few crazy traders that jump into that, into that trend. But that's it. So going back to the third part of the question, which is the ones about the countries and the governments. As I told you, I mean, Boric signed that statement that I mentioned before, and Brazil, and Petro, and the Uruguayan president that 2 days ago was saying that Maduro was a dictator. I mean, what I'm trying to tell you is that those liberals are everywhere, and they are not socialist, nothing. They are just liberals. I was happy with the way President Petro behaved at the beginning of this crisis. I noticed that we was sincerely trying to alert Venezuela about a possible U.S. strike, and he made very good statements. But for the last 2 or 3 months, he has been going back to his slimery behavior, which is like saying a few things against, the atrocities of the U.S. in the region and the attacks against Venezuela, but immediately after that saying that Venezuela needs democracy and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. So Boric, the same. We have never trusted Boric because he's pound. He's like he's nothing. And the problem is that we have, and that's something that we might need to analyze. We have a lot of so-called left progressive in the region and around the world, I believe, that they really believe that they are progressive. Some of them believe that they are Marxist, but they are democratic Marxist, you know? And when I hear the word democratic next to Marxist, I immediately smell a problem because there's nothing more democratic than Marxism, you know? So
Yes,
so so so
but even that term, democratic socialism, comes from George Orwell, who was
of course.
who was up to
And
his
the tro
neck
and the
part of the
Trox
British
has
deep
been
state and
talking
so
about
forth.
that for decades also. Anyway, I believe that with that I say a lot. I still believe that it's better to have Petro or Lula around us than having Ivan Duque or the other crazy president that was just put in jail in Brazil. I forgot his name.
Bolsonaro.
But it, but anyway, I mean, it's better for us to have them there, but I'm not hoping for them to save Venezuela. No, no.
Joe, any final
Yeah,
things you want to say before as we wrap
yeah,
this up?
I just want to make a point here that I made on Twitter. I kind of tweeted this because I get pushback from people because I'm not diplomatic at all because I'm not like uh, I say we don't have to confuse, especially in the imperial core where I live. We can't confuse our role, what our role should be, from what Delcy Rodriguez is trying to do. Delcy Rodriguez, I don't expect her to blast Lula the way he deserves to be blasted, or even Trump. The way, I mean, Maduro did not in recent years. He was very careful not to inflate to use excessive uh, personal rhetoric or attacks on Trump because let's face it, they're in a vulnerable position. They have to be careful how they talk about Trump, and even how they talk about Lula or Scheinbaum, who said, she said, "Oh, I hope please, United States, please give Maduro a fair trial." Just an absolutely idiotic, craven thing to say. But
Wow.
you know, but I guess the point I'm making is, yeah, but you can't, it's one thing what Delcy Rodriguez is in a position to do, or the Venezuelan government, what a government is in a position to say or do, from what we in the global North are in a position to do. I don't think there's much point given given the fact that we effectively live under dictatorships that have totally boxed us in and constrained our speech within ridiculous parameters. I think we have to find a way to burst out of that, and I don't believe in being diplomatic. And what worries me about Lula what worries me about the Lulas and the Petros and the Borics and those and the Scheinbaums, what it worries me about them is that their discourse starts setting the limits for what our discourse is in the imperial north, and that worries me. That I won't have that. So I try to do what I can to make sure that I know whatever idiocy they say, just because they're not as bad as Bolsonaro, I'm not going to let it pass. Okay, I'm not going to let it slide. And because remember, there's this historian who writes for the Nation a lot. His name is Greg Grandin.
Yes, yes, yes,
Somebody
yes.
somebody asked him on Twitter, what do you think about Bernie Sanders calling Maduro a dictator? Or no, it was worse than that. It was even worse. It was, what do you think about, it was Mandami's statements about telling people not to say they support Hamas, or not to say they don't support armed resistance. And his response was, well, within electoral politics, there's things they can't say. We have to cut them some slack. And I'm thinking, what an idiot! What an idiot! What a disgusting idiot! You are living in the imperial north, the country that preaches about its free speech and all this crap, and you're telling people to give a scumbag like that a slack when he says something so disgusting, telling you not to say you support Palestinian armed resistance. I mean, that's your big strategic idea. And I'll say, no, we can't tolerate that. So if you're in the global north, don't listen to people who tell you to be, don't offend other people, make an alliance. It's not working. Okay, it's not working. You just all they end up doing is leading you right back to supporting slimy liberals that Jesus talked about. So that's my advice. Don't do that.
And let's also stop doing the whole left right alliance and so forth. And which is another topic for another day, which we've discussed, which your colleague Justin did also a very good Substack piece about how we need to stop giving so much compliments and praise to far right people when they're selectively anti-war. Sometimes enough of all of that. I mean, it's all hands on deck. Anti-imperialism and socialism is completely related to that, and we really have to yeah, it's all hands on deck. I think when it comes to when it comes to Maduro being imprisoned, and we have to mobilize and mobilize like hell. And it's a perfect place to end. Well, yes,
Listen, Yuri, let me add something about that because
yeah. Go
I
ahead.
believe that Joe actually has been saying a few things about that, about, the what can be done, in the North and mobilization, protest, and letters to the congressmen and things like that. And Joe has been saying for several months already that we need to transcend that. And I believe that is important. And I first heard it from Joe a few months ago. And he talked about why don't we do a boycott, divest, and sanction policy against corporations that are behind what the U.S. doing against Venezuela, for example. And that's an interesting way to approach because we are not going to defeat the empire with protests and letters to the congressman. We need to do something different, something more disruptive, something thinking that the politicians are not the ones running the show. You need to target the ones that are running the show, which are the corporations, the oligarchy in the US, in Canada, in Europe. Those are the ones running the show, really. It doesn't matter if we have Trump or Biden or whomever come, Mandani or whoever come next. The truth is that the ones running the show are the oligarchs, and we need to address them with more uh, disruptive, disruptive actions. So I'm sure that Joe might add something to that.
Anything else you want to add, Joe, to that before I close this out?
No, I think Sue said it well. We need to step up our game and find ways to impose more costs, be more disruptive, like Kasu said. That's the challenge. It's not easy.
And I remember once Professor Chomsky thought that BDS was too harsh on Israel because well, you might as well just do that with the U.S., Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and UK. To which I say, hell yes. Let's also BDS all of them, and yeah. So I completely endorse what you both are suggesting. Well, we were joined on this edition of One Plus One, our All Things Latin America edition, All Things Venezuela edition. I apologize, we didn't get the chance to specifically talk more about elsewhere that's happening in the region, but I promise I'll try to get our wonderful panelists back for that. But until then, I want to thank my guests, Canadian media critic, NGO critic, anti-imperialist campaigner, and critical leftist thinker Joe Emersberger, who's also part of Venezuela Solidarity. Joe, make sure to give me the link to that so I can post it in our pinned comments section. And you can find Joe's articles and more at fair.org, America's leading left-wing media critic organization, Zadnet, Red Sales. But subscribe to his own Substack, Unedited Anti-Imperialism, and get his book. He is the co-author with historian, journalist, host, editor of the Anti-Empire Project, Justin Pordor. They both produced a book, Extraordinary Threats, the U.S. Empire, the Media, and 20 Years of Coup Attempts in Venezuela. And we were also joined by Jesus Rodriguez, the editor-in-chief of Orinoco Tribune, an independent news outlet based in Caracas, covers Latin American and international affairs from a Chavista perspective, and he came to us from Caracas, while Joe came to us from Canada. Comrades, thank you so much for coming on a Saturday to do this recording. Keep up the great work you do. I'll make sure to link all the relevant links that people can check out your work, and I hope donate generously to both of you and support you. And reminder, folks, please share One Plus One widely. Share us across Facebook, Instagram, email, all your social media. Help us overcome the far-right algorithms. Help us overcome the monopoly Western corporate media and Western state media has in the social media world by, again, sharing us widely. Donate to 1+1 at our PayPal. And if you would like to donate differently, yourasmatter@gmail.com, and I'll see what I can do. And lastly, Facebook blocks us from sharing 1+1 sometimes. So it's important that people like and share us. Good night and good luck. Don't despair. Join the Venezuela and Latin American solidarity in the movements to end all forms of Western imperialism. Free Maduro and Cecilia. Free Pedro Castillo. Free Imran Khan. All political free all political prisoners of left-wing conscience, both in the U.S. and their satellite states. Power to the people. Death to Western imperialism. Yankee, Canuck, Anglo, and pan-European imperialism of the EU, NATO. Death to us all, and power to the people again. All my best.
Un abrazo, compa. Bye bye.